Lads of 1% Better, welcome to another video. Happy to have you here. So today we've got a collaboration. I love doing these. I love lifting people up. It really fulfills me. We've got Yahya from Ismonoff TV. I've been following him for quite some time. He's been one of the early animated self-development guys from a while back. And today he's going to teach us how to negotiate a salary. This is based on the book, What Color is Your Parachute? So I hope you guys enjoy it. And a big thank you to Yahya again for coming on the channel. Thank you.
Never discuss the salary until the end of the interview. When you're going to a job interview, your goal is not only to just get the job, but to get it with the maximum salary that's possible. In order to do that, you need to convince the employer that you actually have the skills and the work habits that the employer is looking for. You have to convince them that it's not only that you need the job, but it's the company who needs you as well. So if you jump straight away and talk about the salary in the beginning of the interview, you will spoil the rest of the interview. If you mention a figure that's beyond employer's budget, he won't be interested in continuing the interview. But sometimes, even if you don't want to discuss the salary in the beginning, the employer would ask you about it once you start the interview. So you have to figure out a way to postpone the question. For example, I will gladly answer that, but could you first help me to understand what this job involves? Try to take the control of the interview and start with convincing the employer that he needs you more than you need that job. And by the end of the interview, jump into the salary. Discover the maximum that employer is willing to pay. Every employer, before offering any job, they set a maximum salary that they are willing to pay for that position. But of course, they will do their best to get you for lesser than that. And that's the purpose of the salary negotiation. If you mention a figure that's less than maximum budget and they actually like you, then you're accepted. But remember, you're not getting the maximum salary that's possible. And if you mention a figure that's much higher than their budget, then forget about the job, because employers don't like to convince you to work for them. They want you to convince them to work for them, and that's why you have to figure out a way to know what's the maximum they're willing to pay. Never be the first to mention the salary figure. You are trying to get the employer to pay the most they can, and the employer is trying to pay the least they can. Whoever mentions a salary figure first generally loses. That's why they will try to get you to mention a figure first by asking you some innocent sounding question. What kind of salary are you looking for? Well, how kind of them to ask me what I want, you might be thinking. No. Kindness has nothing to do with this. They're hoping you will be the first to mention the salary figure because they have learned this lesson from the 10,000 interviews in the past. If they ask you to be the first to name a figure, the simple counter move you should have ready is, well, you have created this position, so you must have a figure in mind, and I would be interested in first hearing what that figure is. Know the salaries in your field. Some of you might be asking, how do I know what's the maximum that employer is willing to pay? How do you know that the figure the employer mentioned is the maximum or the minimum he's willing to pay? Very simple. Before you even go to that interview, do some homework. Search for the typical salaries in your field and for your circumstances. For example, a salary for a fresh graduate is very different from the salary of an experienced person. It also depends on how many years of experience you have. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Make sure that when you search, you actually search for salaries in your city, because salaries are very different across the world for the same position. Another thing you have to keep in mind is that it also depends on the size of the company. Big corporations usually have some kind of standards of salaries, but smaller organizations are very different, and the startups are a whole different story. If you can't find sufficient information in the internet, don't hesitate to go and ask people who have worked there or are working there. Set the range. A lot of people do this mistake. They mention a specific figure when they negotiate the salary. Even if the employer mentioned the figure first, you don't have to go straight away and mention a figure that's above that, because that closes the room for discussion. And if the employer is not comfortable with that figure, you might not get the job at all. But instead of that, mention a range. For example, something between 50k and 55k. And here's the thing, you don't simply mention a range after you research salaries in your field. This is how you decide the range. Let's say you have found out that the lowest salary for this position is 50k annually and the maximum is 60k. You don't simply put your range from 50k to 60k, but rather you put it 55k to 65k. So the discussion starts from 55k, which is not the lowest figure and still under employer's budget. And if you manage to negotiate and get 57 or 58k, that's amazing. You almost most good, the maximum for that position. Because at the end of the day, no matter what information you find out there in the internet, the maximum for every employer is very different. That's why it's smarter to mention a range rather than a specific figure. These strategies are very practical, they just need some time and effort. Remember that salaries usually don't change throughout the year or sometimes for years. That's why it's very important to get the highest possible salary from the beginning. Share with me if you have used any of them before. If you guys enjoyed this video, please check out my channel for similar videos, and thanks for watching.